"You're going to have sex with us," said the three giant women already living on the farm. He bought the sky over the high plains, burned with the colors of dusk, the sun dragging its last bloody streaks across the horizon. A lone rider crested the ridge, his silhouette etched against the dying light. His name was Elias Crowe, a man with dust in his veins, silence in his bones, and a past he rarely let anyone near. He carried with him a deed, freshly signed, crisp in the leather saddlebag at his side, granting him ownership of the long-abandoned Hollow Bend farm, a stretch of wild earth left untended for years, cursed by whispers, ignored by men who feared the unknown. Elias didn't scare easy, but the moment he crossed the broken fence line, he felt it, a weight in the air, a hush too heavy. The farmhouse loomed ahead, leaning with age but not broken. Its windows flickered with lantern light. Someone had been living here, though the papers swore the place was empty. Elias swung from his horse, boots crunching gravel, and pushed through the door. Inside, he stopped cold. 3 women stood before him. Not ordinary women. They were giantesses, each one towering, broad-shouldered, their presence filling the farmhouse as though the walls themselves had been stretched to contain them. Their hair fell in thick waves, their eyes sharp as whetted steel, their bodies cast in shadows and firelight. They did not look startled. They did not look afraid. The tallest stepped forward, her voice low and husky, carrying the weight of inevitability. "You're going to have sex with us." The words struck him harder than any bullet he had ever taken. Not a request, not a plea, a declaration, a law written in flesh and silence. Elias's jaw tightened. He had seen ambushes, betrayals, strange deals in stranger towns, but nothing like this. He scanned their faces, their posture. There was no mockery there, no laughter, no hint of cruelty, only certainty. And something else, something human, buried deep under that unyielding command. The second woman, dark-haired, her eyes like pools of sorrow, spoke softer, almost breaking the spell of threat. "We've waited too long for someone to walk through that door. The farm chooses who stays and who doesn't." The third, youngest, with a fierce gaze and fire in her breath, smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You bought the land, Cowboy. That means you bought us too." Elias stood in the silence that followed, the sound of his own heart drumming against the wooden walls. He felt the weight of their words, heavier than the colt at his side. He had thought he was buying soil, fences, maybe a chance to start fresh. Instead, he had walked into a binding older than law, older than scripture. And as their gazes pinned him where he stood, Elias knew one thing. If he stayed, nothing in his life, nothing in his soul, would remain untouched. This is no ordinary Western tale. Stay with this story till the very end, and you'll uncover not only the shocking truth of these women and their curse, but also a haunting lesson about desire, fate, and the chains we choose, or break, in the wild lands of the Old West. The night deepened over Hollow Bend, the prairie wind brushing against the shutters like ghostly fingers. Elias stood his ground inside the farmhouse, his shadow long beneath the lantern flame. 3 giant women watched him, their presence so heavy it felt like the air itself had been thickened with secrets. He did not reach for his Colt. Instinct told him bullets were useless here. Against outlaws, bandits, or drunken cattle rustlers, lead had always been a language he spoke well. But here, In this dim house, with its cracked beams and flickering oil lamp, Elias understood. This was a different frontier. Not of guns, but of vows. Not of land, but of bodies and souls. The tallest one, broad-shouldered, hair pale as straw, leaned closer. Her eyes burned steady, almost ancient. You feel it, don't you? The pull. The farm's choice. Elias's lips parted, dry as the dust road outside. I feel something. The second, dark-haired with eyes like bottomless rivers, crossed her arms, her towering form shifting shadows along the walls. It claimed us, long ago. Bound us here until the land itself decided another man would carry the weight. You bought it. That makes you ours. The third, the youngest, flame in her gaze, laughed, sharp and brittle. Don't look at us as if we're asking. We are not. This isn't courtship, Cowboy. It's debt. And debts must be paid. Elias felt the words wrap around him like iron chains. Yet somewhere in his marrow, the rancher's stubborn blood boiled. I don't belong to anyone, he said quietly, the low growl of a man who had lost too much already. Land doesn't own me. Women don't own me. And curses sure as hell don't own me. The tallest one smiled, not with cruelty, but with something sadder, heavier. Then you'll die here. Silence fell, so loud it drowned the crickets outside. Later, Elias found himself on the porch, pipe unlit between his fingers, staring at the moonlit fields he now owned. The three women remained inside, their hulking silhouettes moving about like restless spirits caged in timber. His horse whickered in the dark, uneasy. Elias could almost hear his old comrades laughing at him. Elias Crowe, gunman and survivor, brought to his knees not by bullets, but by women taller than the doorframe. But laughter faded, replaced by something sharper. Curiosity. He had seen many things along the frontier. Men scalped for gold, priests hanging for sins, rivers running red after skirmishes. But he had never seen women like this. Never heard a curse binding land to flesh. The door creaked open. The dark-haired woman stepped out, shawl around her broad shoulders. She lowered herself onto the step beside him, the porch groaning beneath her weight. For a long moment, she said nothing. Only the wind carried voices of coyotes somewhere out there, singing their hunger to the night. Finally, she spoke. You think we like this? Elias glanced sideways, surprised by the break in her tone. Softer. Human. You didn't sound like women begging mercy in there. We aren't begging, she said. We're warning. The farm is alive, Cowboy. It breathes in the soil. It drinks in the rain. It hungers. We didn't choose it. We stumbled onto it long ago, and it swallowed us whole. We've tried to leave. Every time it drags us back. Every man who's tried to break the bond. She shook her head, dark hair catching moonlight. Didn't last the night. Elias's chest tightened. And you think I'll be different? She turned toward him, eyes glassy pools of sorrow. We know you'll be different. The land doesn't choose wrong, but it always demands its due. Her words chilled him, though the night was already cold. Elias puffed air through his teeth, still clutching the unlit pipe. He wanted to tell her she was mad, that curses were for children's tales, not men who'd killed and buried enough to know what was real. But then he remembered the way the farmhouse seemed to breathe when he entered, the way the floorboards throbbed faintly under his boots, as if a heartbeat pulsed through the earth itself. He said nothing. The woman rose, her shawl falling from one shoulder. She looked down at him with something like pity, something like warning. Then she left him with the crickets and the coyotes. By dawn, Elias's resolve was carved as sharp as the horizon. He would not be owned. Not by curses, not by women, not by dirt or law. If Hollow Bend had secrets, he would dig them out with his bare hands. He saddled his horse, rode the fence lines, studied the soil, the creek that twisted through the backfields, the skeletal orchard leaning in the wind. He felt watched the whole time, eyes from the house, from the trees, from the ground itself. When he returned, sweat streaking his dust-caked shirt, the youngest one stood in the yard. Her fiery gaze locked on him, arms folded across her massive chest. "You're stubborn," she said flatly. "Stubborn keeps me alive. Stubborn gets you buried." She stepped closer, her shadow swallowing his. "You'll learn, or you'll bleed." Elias looked up at her, and though she could have crushed him under a single hand, he didn't flinch. He met her eyes with that same steady fire that had carried him through every fight, every betrayal, every loss. And in that locked gaze, for the briefest breath, something shifted. The woman faltered, her lips parting as though she'd forgotten the script the curse demanded. Then, just as quick, she hardened again and turned away. That night, Elias lay on the creaking bed of the farmhouse, staring at the rafters. The three giant women moved through the house like restless storms, their voices low, indistinct, like the whisper of trees bending in wind. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, he felt the land beneath the house, beneath his body, breathing. And when the floorboards groaned like ribs under strain, Elias understood. He hadn't just bought a farm. He had bought into something alive, and something alive always demands to be fed. The farm is no ordinary land. In the next chapter, Elias will uncover the bloody fate of the men who came before him, and the unspeakable price Hollow Bend Farm demands. Watch on, because the truth will not only shock you, it will force you to question how far a man can go before he becomes part of the curse himself. Morning at Hollow Bend came with a copper glow, the prairie grass shimmering under a restless wind. Elias Crowe rose from the creaking bed, boots hitting the warped floorboards. His sleep had been shallow, broken by dreams of voices whispering through the soil, of hands clawing from beneath the orchard. He strapped on his gun belt, not out of need, but out of habit. Some men carried crucifixes against evil. Elias carried steel. The three giant women were already awake. He found them in the barn, moving through their chores with eerie rhythm. Despite their size, they handled tools with care, binding broken beams, lifting hay bales as if they weighed no more than twigs. They looked like women, but something about their movements, mechanical, bound to some hidden pattern, chilled him. The youngest, fire-eyed, noticed him first. "You look pale, Cowboy. The farm is already speaking to you, isn't it?" Elias didn't answer. He walked past her, running his hand along the barn's wood. The timber was warm, too warm for morning chill. He pulled his hand back sharply. The tallest woman, hair the color of dry straw, stopped her work and leaned against a beam, studying him. "Don't waste your strength fighting it. No man has left Hollow Bend untouched. Some leave in pieces. Others stay forever." The dark-haired woman, the sorrowful one, set down her tools and stepped closer. "Do you want to know what happened to them? The men before you?" Elias's jaw tensed. He had been expecting this. "Tell me." They led him to the orchard. The skeletal trees clawed at the sky, their bark brittle, branches heavy with neither leaf nor fruit. Beneath them, the earth seemed swollen, mounded, as though it had been dug and filled too many times. The youngest pointed to the nearest tree. Her voice was low, sharp. 6 years ago, a drifter bought Hollow Bend, a strong man, mean as a rattler. He thought he could take us by force. The farm took him first. Elias knelt, brushing aside the dry soil. His hand struck wood. A crossbeam. A coffin lid. He rose slowly, dust on his fingers. His eyes flicked to the next tree. And that one? The dark-haired woman's lips trembled. A preacher. Spoke of cleansing us, casting out evil. He lasted 3 nights. On the 4th, the orchard drank him. The wind moaned through the empty branches. Elias's throat burned. He pointed further down the line. How many? The tallest woman answered with the quiet weight of a tombstone. 11 men, 11 graves, all chosen, all failed. Elias's gut clenched. The orchard wasn't just dead trees. It was a graveyard. A field of failed men who thought themselves strong, righteous, or clever enough to break the curse. And you? Elias asked, turning on them suddenly. What are you in this? Wives? Widows? Witches? The youngest flinched, fury flashing in her eyes, but it was the dark-haired woman who answered, voice thick with old grief. Prisoners, just like you. The tallest added, her face unreadable. Except we've been here far longer, bound not by our will, but by the land's. You think we want to share its hunger? You think we want to take men into our beds because it whispers for us to? No. But the farm commands, and we obey. Elias looked at them, the fire in his chest sparking hotter. He saw not just monsters, but women caught in chains deeper than his own. For the first time, he wondered if their demand, "You're going to have sex with us," was not born of lust or cruelty, but of survival. Still, he would not bend. Then I'll break it, Elias said, voice like gravel dragged across steel. This curse, this hunger, whatever it is, I'll find the root and burn it clean. The youngest laughed bitterly. Men before you said the same. Now they feed the orchard. Elias spat into the dirt. Then I'll be the first to walk away standing. That night, the storm came. Clouds bruised the sky, lightning slashed the horizon, and rain hammered the fields. Elias lit a lantern and sat at the kitchen table, maps of the land spread before him. He traced the lines of the creek, the orchard, the broken fences. Somewhere, beneath all this, lay the truth. The 3 women moved restlessly through the house. Their whispers drifted from room to room, words half in language, half in something older. Suddenly, the youngest burst through the kitchen door, soaked in rain, hair wild around her giant face. Her eyes burned as bright as the lantern flame. They're coming. Elias rose. Who? The others, the ones who never left. And then he heard it. The sound of earth tearing, wood splintering, the moan of the orchard alive in the storm. Figures moved in the lightning's flash, half-formed shapes clawing from the wet ground, shadows of men who had been buried but not forgotten. The orchard's dead were rising. The tallest woman grabbed a pitchfork, her giant hands white-knuckled. You wanted to see the truth, Cowboy. Now you will. The dark-haired woman whispered a prayer Elias could not understand. Her eyes glistened, tears mingling with rain. And Elias Crowe, his colt drawn at last, stepped to the door, stormlight bathing his grim face. He was not a man who believed in ghosts, but this night he would fight them. As the storm rages, Elias must confront the risen dead of Hollow Bend, the 11 men who came before him, twisted into something less than human. Watch on, for in the next chapter the line between man, monster, and curse will blur, and Elias will learn the true price of defiance. The storm split the prairie open. Thunder rolled like cannon fire across the flatlands, shaking the farmhouse to its bones. Rain hammered the shingles, pouring through the cracks like fingers of ice. Elias Crowe stood at the threshold, Colt in hand, his silhouette cut sharp against the lightning. Beyond him, the orchard writhed with movement. Shapes clawed upward from the mud, half men, half corpses, slick with earth. 11 of them, their faces blurred between flesh and rot, eyes glowing with something that wasn't life, but wasn't death either. The youngest woman stood behind him, a storm herself, hair plastered against her giant face, jaw clenched. They won't stop until they drag you down, cowboy. None of them ever stopped. Elias spat rainwater from his lips. Then I'll put them back in the ground. He stepped into the storm. The first figure lunged from the orchard, its jaw snapping as if chewing air. Elias's revolver cracked, fire lighting the rain. The shot split through its skull, snapping it back, yet the corpse staggered forward, mouth still working. "Bullets won't hold them," the dark-haired woman cried, her voice breaking through thunder. Elias cursed under his breath, firing again and again. Each round slowed them, but didn't end them. The orchard groaned louder, soil heaving with hunger, trees shaking as if their roots feasted on the storm itself. The tallest woman charged past him, pitchfork raised high. She drove it into one corpse's chest, pinning it to the mud. The thing shrieked, a sound like wind scraping bone. Elias caught its gaze. The eyes weren't empty. They burned with torment, as if the men buried here were still trapped inside, screaming without voices. The youngest giantess grabbed one of the risen by its throat, lifting it clear from the muck. Her hand trembled. For a heartbeat, Elias thought she might crush it, but her grip faltered. She hurled it aside instead, fury laced with fear. "These were men," she hissed, "chosen like you. Men who tried to resist. We knew them." Elias fired again, emptying the last chamber. His chest heaved. Rain plastered his shirt against muscle and scar. He lowered the gun, useless iron now, and drew his knife, steel glinting against the storm's fury. "Then I'll cut them free," he said. The fight became madness. Elias slashed and dodged, every move desperate, every strike spilling mud instead of blood. The women battled beside him, giants against the dead, their fury shaking the orchard. The tallest swung the pitchfork like a spear, driving bodies back into the muck. The dark-haired one sang a strange chant between her sobs, words older than the land, each syllable burning the corpses like salt on wounds. And Elias fought like a man possessed. His knife tore through sinew, severed grasping hands, carved a path through the storm. But the risen kept coming, jaws snapping, claws dragging furrows through the mud. At last, lightning split the orchard clean in two, and Elias saw it. The earth at the orchard's heart bulged, roots knotted like veins, pulsing with each thunderclap. From it rose a massive trunk, black and wet, splitting upward like a ribcage. The tree's hollow center glowed faintly, sickly yellow, as if a heart beat inside. The orchard wasn't just fed by the dead. The orchard was the dead. Every man who had fallen here, every body swallowed by the land, had become part of its root and bone. Elias staggered back, mud up to his knees, knife clutched, white-knuckled. His voice cut through the storm. This is what it wants." The youngest shouted back, fire in her eyes. "It doesn't just want the land tended. It wants seed, flesh, blood. That's why it bound us. That's why it bound them." She pointed at Elias, her arm trembling, her face torn between rage and pleading. "That's why it bound you. Elias stared at the monstrous tree, its glowing core, the 11 corpses staggering at its feet like worshippers. His stomach twisted. For the first time in years, fear clawed deep into him. But he didn't let it show. The fight dragged into hours. One by one, the women drove the corpses back into the earth, stomping, smashing, forcing the orchard to reclaim them. Elias fought until his knife dulled, until his arms burned, and his breath tore raw in his throat. At last, silence fell. The orchard stood still, its roots pulsing faintly, its heart dim. The graves were closed again. Elias dropped to one knee, chest heaving. His hands shook, coated in mud, rain, and something darker. He looked up at the women, their towering frames bent in exhaustion. The storm began to ease, thunder rolling farther, rain softening into drizzle. The tallest woman planted the pitchfork in the ground, leaning heavily on it. You see it now. What the farm is. The dark-haired one wiped tears from her face. This is why no man survives here. The land doesn't just take their lives. It takes their will. It breaks them down until they give in. The youngest spat into the mud, eyes blazing at Elias. You can't fight it forever. Sooner or later, it will claim you. The only question is whether you go screaming or give yourself willingly. Elias rose slowly, every bone aching, every scar on his body burning like fresh wounds. He looked at the orchard, at the swollen roots, the dim hollow, the trees clawing at the heavens, and then back at the women. His voice was hoarse but steady. Maybe it's taken 11, but I'm not the 12th. The youngest laughed bitterly. Every man says that. Elias holstered his empty Colt, knife dripping mud at his side. His eyes burned with a fire older than the curse, older than the land. The fire of a man who had buried friends and foes alike, who had nothing left to lose but his defiance. Then maybe it's time the orchard learned, Elias growled, what it means to choke on a man who refuses to bow. The storm passed. The prairie sighed. But Hollow Bend was not finished with him. Not yet. The orchard sleeps, but not for long. In the next chapter, Elias will uncover how the farm feeds on more than bodies. It feeds on the very bond between man and woman. Watch on, because the truth behind the women's curse is darker than anything the storm revealed. The storm passed like a fever breaking, leaving the prairie shivering under a gray morning sky. The orchard loomed behind the farmhouse, silent once more, its trees wet with rain and secrets. Elias Crowe stood in the yard, his shirt plastered to his back, his hands trembling though he wouldn't admit it. The women towered near him, steam rising from their soaked clothes like mist from war horses. For a long time, none of them spoke. Only the drip of rain from the roof, the slow hiss of water against the hearth inside, and the uneasy silence of a land that had just fed. Finally, the dark-haired woman broke the silence. Her voice was raw from chanting, her eyes swollen from tears. You see now why no man lasts. The orchard doesn't just kill, it binds. The men it swallows don't rest. They serve. Elias didn't answer. He was staring at the black tree at the orchard's heart, its hollow still glowing faintly like a dying ember. His jaw was tight, his knife still muddy in his hand. The youngest, fiery-eyed, stepped forward. Her tone was sharp, accusing. You think you're different? That your defiance makes you strong? It only makes the farm hungrier. It will break you, Crowe. Sooner or later, it will take what it wants. Elias finally turned, his eyes like storm-wrecked stone. "And what does it want?" The tallest woman, silent until now, answered in a voice low as thunder. "It wants life. It wants seed. It wants the bond between man and woman, because that is where creation lives. That's why it chose us. That's why it chose you." Her words hit him harder than the storm. Elias felt his chest tighten, breath coming sharp. The images struck him without mercy. The orchard fed not just on flesh, but on the union of flesh. That was why the three giant women had been bound here, why they had demanded him on his first night. It wasn't lust, it wasn't cruelty, it was survival, for them and for the farm. He spat into the mud, his voice a rasp. "I won't be bred for a curse." The youngest stepped closer, towering over him, rain dripping from her wild hair. "Then you'll die like the rest." But something in her gaze wavered, rage at war with despair. Elias caught it, that flicker of humanity beneath the curse's command. Inside the farmhouse, Elias sat at the table, staring at the deed that had brought him here. Paper and ink. Fragile things compared to the roots and hunger of Hollow Bend. His fingers drummed on the wood, restless. The dark-haired woman entered, her steps heavy, but her presence softer than the others. She set a tin cup of coffee before him, though her giant hand nearly swallowed it whole. For a while, they sat in silence, steam rising between them. Finally, she spoke, voice trembling. "We never wanted this. Once, we were daughters, sisters, wives. We had lives beyond these fences. The farm caught us, bound us, stretched us into what you see now. And every man since has been dragged into the same chain." Elias studied her face. The sorrow there was deeper than grief. It was resignation, the kind a prisoner wears after too many years behind bars. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Tell me the truth. If I give in, if I do what it demands, does it end? Or does it only grow stronger?" Her eyes welled, but she held his gaze. "It never ends. Each time it grows. Each union, each act, feeds it. That is why we hate it, why we hate ourselves for obeying. But it won't let us stop. It whispers, it commands, and if we resist, it punishes." Elias's hands clenched into fists. The curse wasn't just hunger. It was enslavement. It turned desire into chains, intimacy into a weapon. The tallest woman entered then, carrying a bundle of firewood under her massive arms. She set it down with a heavy thud and looked straight at Elias. "You can fight. You can refuse. But the farm always wins. 11 men thought themselves iron. 11 lie beneath the orchard now. You'll be the 12th if you don't listen." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was weary certainty. The youngest stormed in last, slamming the door against the morning wind. Her voice cracked with fury. "Stop talking to him like he has a choice. He doesn't." None of them ever did. "The farm already owns him." Her words echoed through the farmhouse like gunfire. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He paced the farmhouse, lantern in hand, shadows stretching long. Every creak of the floor, every groan of the beams, felt like the heartbeat of something alive beneath him. At the window, he watched the orchard. The trees swayed though the air was still. The black trunk at the center pulsed faintly, like a heart dreaming in its sleep. He thought of the women, 3 prisoners forced to serve, their lives stolen, their bodies turned into vessels. He thought of the 11 men, now little more than roots and mud, clawing at the living when the storm called them. And he thought of himself. For years, Elias had wandered the frontier, carrying his ghosts. A brother buried in war, a wife lost to fever, a son never born. He had come to Hollow Bend, seeking land, a place to start again. Now he had found only another grave, waiting to claim him. Unless he broke it. And not with bullets, not with blades, but by tearing apart the bond the farm fed upon. He clenched his jaw, staring into the night. "If it wants me to bow," he whispered, "then I'll burn before I bend." Morning brought no peace. The women moved through the house like storm clouds, each carrying her own torment. Elias saddled his horse, determined to ride into town, find a priest, a shaman, a stranger with answers. But when he reached the edge of the property, his horse reared, foam spraying from its mouth, refusing to cross the fence line. No matter how Elias pulled, the animal would not leave. The farm had already claimed him. He rode back, fury boiling, and dismounted in the yard. The youngest was waiting, arms folded, eyes blazing. "You see now, you're bound, like us. You think you can escape, but the land already has its claws in you." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Maybe, but claws can be cut." She laughed, bitter and broken. "You'll see. It's not just your life it wants. It's your soul. And when you give in, when you finally take us, the farm will be reborn stronger than ever." Elias stepped closer, his voice a growl. "Then I'll die fighting it." The youngest's eyes softened for the briefest instant, her fury cracking into something like sorrow. She whispered so low he barely heard, "Then you'll die in my arms." The farm has shown its hunger, but Elias refuses to bend. In the final chapter, his defiance will reach its breaking point, and the truth of the women's curse will be laid bare. Watch on, because the ending will deliver a revelation as haunting as it is human. The prairie lay still under the weight of dawn, a brittle quiet that followed storms and battles alike. Elias Crowe stood in the yard, breath steaming in the cool air, his eyes fixed on the orchard. The black tree at its heart pulsed faintly, like a wound refusing to close. He had seen enough of war, enough of men broken by forces they never understood, to know this was no curse he could simply outrun. Hollow Bend would take him, or he would take it. There was no middle ground. Behind him, the farmhouse creaked as the three women stirred. The tallest emerged first, her straw-colored hair tangled, her frame stooped with exhaustion. Then the dark-haired one, her face lined with sorrow. Last came the youngest, her fire dimmed, though sparks still smoldered in her eyes. They stood together, giants bound not by choice, but by chains older than memory. Elias looked at them, at their grief, their weariness, their unspoken plea, and made his decision. He would end this, for them, for the men who had fallen before, and for himself. That night, Elias prepared as though for war. He cleaned his colt, though he knew bullets could not kill roots. He sharpened his knife, though he knew steel could not cut curses. And he lit every lantern in the farmhouse, filling it with a glow that pushed shadows back into corners. The women watched him, silent. They had seen 11 men ready themselves before. They had watched each one fall. When the hour grew heavy and the orchard began to stir with whispers, Elias took his lantern and strode toward it. The women followed, their massive steps shaking the earth. Together, they entered the field of graves. The black tree loomed above them, its hollow chest glowing brighter than ever, roots twitching like veins beneath the soil. The air was thick, choking, as if every breath was borrowed. The tallest woman's voice trembled. "Once you step inside, there's no turning back." Elias's gaze never left the tree. "I never turned back in my life." He stepped into the hollow. Inside, the world bent. The lantern flame flickered blue, shadows crawling across the black wood like living things. Elias felt the earth breathe around him, slow and deep, a rhythm that threatened to sync with his own heart. Whispers clawed at his ears, voices of men long dead, of women long broken. They begged, they cursed, they wept. Elias gritted his teeth, refusing to let the farm crawl inside his mind. Suddenly, the glow flared. Roots lashed upward, curling around his arms, his legs, dragging him toward the core. His lantern shattered, plunging him into living darkness. The women cried out behind him, their giant forms struggling against invisible chains. The farm had bound them too, forcing them to watch. Elias fought like a man drowning, knife flashing in the dark. He hacked at the roots, severing them, mud and sap spraying like blood. But each cut only birthed two more, coiling tighter. The voices grew louder. "Give yourself. Join us. Feed us. Breed us." Elias roared, his voice tearing the hollow open. "I am no seed for your hunger." With a final surge, he plunged the knife deep into the glowing core. The orchard screamed, not with sound, but with force. The earth bucked, trees cracking, branches thrashing like whips. Graves split open, coffins shattering, bones spilling into the storm of roots. The women were thrown to their knees, their cries lost in the chaos. The black tree's glow turned blinding, then burst outward in a torrent of fire and ash. Roots recoiled, shriveling, their grip loosening from Elias's body. He fell to the mud, knife still buried in the heart of the farm. When the light faded, silence returned. The orchard was dead, truly dead. The trees stood still and gray, their bark crumbling, their roots no longer pulsing. The graves lay quiet, their inhabitants finally at rest. Elias staggered to his feet, every muscle screaming, every scar burning. He looked to the women. The tallest was rising slowly, her massive frame trembling. The dark-haired one pressed her hands to her chest, her eyes wide with shock. The youngest stared at him, her lips parted, her fire blazing anew. The curse was broken, but breaking chains carries a price. As dawn crept over Hollow Bend, Elias watched the women begin to change. Their giant forms trembled, then shrank, their limbs folding, their features softening. They collapsed to the ground, gasping, their towering bodies shedding the unnatural size that had bound them. When it was done, 3 women knelt in the mud, no longer giants, but human again, human and free. Tears streaked their faces as they looked to Elias. The dark-haired one whispered, her voice fragile as glass. You did it." The tallest touched her chest, where her heart beat fast and unbound. "After all these years, the farm has let us go." The youngest crawled to Elias, her hands clutching his mud-streaked shirt. Her eyes burned not with fury, but with gratitude, and something deeper, something raw. "You should be dead, yet you live." Elias, bloodied and broken, looked at them with a weary smile. "I've been living with death chasing me for years. This time, I finally outran it. For days, the prairie whispered of Hollow Ben's orchard burning from the inside out, though no flames touched it. The land grew quiet, as if sighing with relief. Elias buried his knife in the heart of the dead tree, a marker of the battle won. He sold the deed back to the town, refusing to claim soil that had tasted too much blood. The women, no longer giants, no longer bound, stood beside him as the prairie wind swept their hair like banners. They had their freedom, and though their future was uncertain, it was finally their own. As for Elias Crowe, he mounted his horse once more. He looked back at the farmhouse one last time, then turned his gaze to the horizon. The West had no shortage of curses. But as long as men like him drew breath, some could be broken. And so ends the tale of Hollow Bend, a story not only of curses and hunger, but of defiance, freedom, and the strength it takes to say no to the chains of fate. Remember, watch till the end of every Wild West story, because in the dust and blood of the frontier lies a lesson for us all.